Guys, thanks so much for joining us today. This will be a fun one because we're actually going to do it in person as opposed to over a Zoom call. But I've got Sam Smith with me. Clearly what you will notice first is that he has better socks, larger biceps, and he's a better golfer than I am. So if we can get past that fact, we'll have a great conversation. But I'd love to just introduce Sam really quickly, let him give you a quick brief on what he's doing, and most importantly, I want him to talk about how he helps his clients and athletes get better. So Sam.
Yes. Hi, I'm Sam Smith, coach for Big Dawgs. I work mainly with competitive athletes. I'm based here in Scottsdale at our headquarters, and right now I'm preparing 3 athletes for the CrossFit Games.
So how do you, let's take those 3 athletes and then compare, contrast them a little bit. So how would you help those 3 athletes be their best for the games right now?
Good question. So the biggest thing that I have to think about, because we have such a limited time from when they qualified, is building confidence in all attributes that they need to compete at the games. So it's not so much that I'm trying to raise their fitness levels in certain areas, but more so make them feel as confident as possible in each of the disciplines that they need to be competent at to compete at the highest level.
So how would you increase confidence? What would you do specifically to do that?
That's a great question. So that's going to obviously be unique person to person because their personality and essence is going to kind of dictate how you can build confidence. For example, one of my athletes, he needs to be challenged more to build confidence. And what I mean by that is I need to give him things that make him feel like his back is against the wall and he has to like fight his way out, and then that allows him to see that he can do something that he didn't think he could because he was put up against, in a fight almost.
He's got to overcome.
Exactly. And then with a couple other of my athletes, they need kind of the opposite of that. They need to be like nurtured and slowly exposed to something that makes them a little uncomfortable, but they see that there's an opportunity for them to succeed. If it's too much, then they're overwhelmed and they count themselves out really easily. So the way in which you do it is very dependent on the person and their essence, we'll say. So I look at that first, and then from that I create tests or layouts of their training that facilitate that model that I need to build the confidence.
So in unique workouts or during this phase of training, you're identifying those workouts that you would say in your head, this is a confidence builder or this is a confidence tester.
Yes, because I can't give them all things that make them feel good about themselves, because they're going to face something and be like, wow, I'm not prepared at all. And then that's going to be really deflating. So it's like a balance between giving them touches of things that build confidence and make them feel like they're improving, and then things that make them really challenge where they're currently at and see if they can push past their preconceived notions of what their capabilities are at the present moment.
Interesting. So let me contrast those 3 games athletes and say you have an athlete who's coming to you earlier in this process or in their journey. They want to go to the CrossFit Games. Let's just assume that you think that they're 3 years out, okay? And that's not overly optimistic, that's just what you believe. What are you working with them on generally out of the gates?
That's a good point you bring up, because I think that's one thing I try to give people that come to me is truth and reality versus fantasy, because as you know, the market gives a lot of fantasy. And people see games athletes and all that comes with that is this big prize that they won, and then they think it's pretty attainable, especially if they might be the best in their box or they won a competition or they did okay in the open. But there's a big difference between like a games athlete and somebody who's pretty good at CrossFit or fitness. And so
I'd say there's a big difference between a games athlete and a former regional athlete.
Oh yeah. And it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so I try to give people the reality of where they currently are at, so that we're both on the same page, and then they know that their road to the games could be 3-4 years, and that makes it a lot easier because now they can buy into this process that's going to take a lot of time, instead of me trying to say, oh yeah, well maybe this year we can do it. And definitely not going to happen, and that creates a little bit of lack of trust and alignment between the athlete and myself.
If you had 10 new athletes come to you, and they all wanted to make the games, how many of those 10 have a realistic timeline of what it would actually look like? Like when they come to you, prior to coming to you.
I know what you're saying. 10. Say 30%, 3 out of 10. Have like a realistic.
I would have thought 1 or 2.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people can get something really, really from this is the expectation has to be unique to the individual. Because if you, like a lot of people think that you could be a collegiate wrestler and that makes you more prepared to be a CrossFit Games athlete. Well, maybe in certain aspects of fitness it does, but in other aspects it might make you a year behind.
Yeah.
You know, so I think a lot of people need to find that reality. So if you help them find that expectation, which I agree 1,000%, it helps build trust in you. What is it that you want to generally set them up early to do? Do you look for a weakness that you go after? Do you look for just broad training principles?
Yeah, great question. So, as simple as it sounds, I help people create great consistency and rhythm for years, and that's what breeds success at the highest level. You look at any successful person in any field, like there's a lot of consistency and rhythm with everything they do relative to their job, whether it's their schedule for the day, things with works, meetings, training, eating, downtime. There's so much consistency. There's no chaos or variability with like the big things. And so with my athletes, what I try to get them bought into up front is this idea of great consistency with their sleep, their nourishment, their stress, their job, their training, their psychology, and how they kind of mold and flow with that as they develop as a human and as an athlete. And so by doing that up front and then building these years of that, before you know it, they become this overnight success because of all this work that they've done that's led them to this moment.
So basically, the way that I just heard that is you help them create the right habits for what they're trying to achieve.
Exactly.
So instead of being the person they came to you, you are helping them become the person they want to be.
Exactly.
And then through compounding habit,
yes,
they get better and better and better.
Yes.
Gosh, I hope a lot of people just listen to that because I think that's so major.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got sort of a baseline of how you get people help, but I want to go to you for a second.
Yeah.
So what in your history or what experiences have helped you understand this? So obviously golf and sports and what's led you here?
And as you can relate, because you were a Division I athlete, at a young age, like we're thrown into a sport where we're expected to live the role of a professional athlete, where like our day revolves around training and practicing and everything that goes into that, which can be stressful at first, but there's so much value that put into me that now I put into my athletes, because I spent the majority of my life competing at a very high level in a sport, and then I spent a good 6 years where my routine and regimen was just like, it was just nonstop. I'd get up, I'd practice, I'd do this, I'd train, I'd practice, etc., day in, day out, and then I'd go to tournaments and compete, review the tournament, speak with my coaches, review that. Like, there was just so much rhythm and consistency with that, which led me to this point where I got to a very respectable level in this sport. And only by looking back at everything that I did for so long could I see why I got to that level. It wasn't just because I was gifted or I was in the right circumstances. Like, there was so much that went into that to put me in the position to do that. And so that experience has given me insight into what athletes in this sport need, even more so because of how much demand the physical body takes as compared to golf, that this consistency aspect that you have to build for years and years and years leads you to this human that you want to be eventually, where you're competing at the games.
Yeah, I think the term 10,000 hours is almost like a biohack term now, which is like, oh, you just spend 10,000 hours and you're good to go.
Yeah.
But I think there's something so unique about the individual that spends 10,000 focused hours.
Yes.
And 10,000 inspired hours doing something. I think that's so different, where these athletes coming in, Well, let me take it aside for a second. You were a golfer and I was a tennis player, and I've been told for, gosh, the last 2 decades that individual sports, which, by the way, CrossFit would generally be an individual sport, are more mentally taxing because you're the only one that's accountable.
Yep.
You can't blame anybody else.
No.
And so I think that a lot of CrossFit athletes maybe could gain some solace in knowing that there are some other sports out there that put similar types of mental stress on it.
Yep.
But back to kind of your consistency point, how do you identify when an athlete either has it or doesn't? And then if an athlete doesn't, how do you go at them to help them improve it?
Good point. I think for me, I can almost smell it in them if they're not, as funny as that sounds, like I can sense if they're not on board with what I'm telling them, or it's not getting into their head why it's important. And so at first, I'll spend more time dialoguing with them on, okay, let's discuss like what needs to happen to get you to where you want to go. And a lot of the times, it's me helping them talk through what needs to happen, not so much me telling them, because most of the time, you don't really tell people what to do. You need people to understand what they need to do. Like they have to come to the conclusion themselves. And so I talk through them like, so and so. Let's just use a name. Tia Toomey. Tia Claire Toomey. There we go. What do you think she has to do on a daily basis to get her to the position? And so the athlete might say, well, she trains and she does this and does that. Okay, good. Now, how long do you think she's been doing that for? Well, probably a long time. And I was like, what do you think has been the consistent factor with that? Well, training. Okay, what else do you think has been consistent? Well, she's probably made sure she's getting enough food in, and she probably doesn't have much work, so she's not as stressed. Okay, good. What about maybe other factors? Yeah, maybe she sleeps. So I help them try to make this connection of, okay, there's all these things that they're probably doing, and they've probably been doing it for 5 to 10 years. And so now the light bulb's going on in their head about, okay, yeah, these are important variables I need to think about. And then I tie it into them and go, okay, now where do you think you sit right now on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the games champion and 1 being somebody who sits on their couch all day. Where do you think you sit? And they're like, oh, maybe I'm a 7. Okay, so what do we need to do to get you to an 8?
Yeah.
It's like, and then they'll say, well, I could probably be a little better with my sleep. Okay, now what can we do to improve the sleep quality you're at right now? Well, this is what I'm currently doing. And then we just kind of go through that. And so that whole process takes place with anyone I have who I feel is not 100% on board with everything. And of course we're human, so we're not always perfect, but that's part of my job, is helping people just continually bring that number up closer and closer to 10 and staying at 10 for 2 to 3, 4 years so that they're in that position physically and mentally to be able to go after something that they want.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that so much of even the old Soviet Union text, right, on strength building and preparing for the Olympics.
Yeah.
They talk about one Olympic cycle like it's just the short term, right?
Yeah.
A 4-year cycle is just the start of a process. And
yeah.
CrossFit, I think, because people could make the games back in 09, 10, 11,
Yeah.
12, people just thought it was easy to do this. And at this point, don't get me wrong, there could be a phenom that sneaks into the games here and there, but to truly have what it takes to consistently be at that stage is a different story.
Yeah.
And you look at the folks who are still in it, 5, 6, 7 years later, it just takes that long to understand the game deeply enough, I think. Well, let's talk about the games for a minute. So you've got 3 athletes going. What do you anticipate will be some of the challenges that they will face?
Man, that's a great question. Well, they'll definitely face adversity, which is a very ambiguous term, but what I mean by that is they'll face things that they might feel they're not as prepared for, even though they probably are prepared, but maybe they start to doubt themselves. Or
Let me stop you for a second. Why do you think they doubt themselves?
I think it's a innate feature in athletes that there's always this little bit of doubt, which almost pushes the athlete forward. If there's too much confidence, they almost get bored, or they're like, "What's the point of doing this? Because I'm so good." And then when you do that, most of the time you get hit in the face with the right hook. So that little bit of doubt is very powerful, because that's the voice inside that that forces you to keep moving forward, especially when you feel like you can't. And so that varies, because some athletes it's very small, and some athletes it's ginormous, and some of the best athletes have very loud voices like that, and that's what pushes them forward. So that doubt's a good thing, but making sure you're managing that so it doesn't become too loud where you can't overcome that. And the reason I said that is just the nature of the games. You have this new format now where there's going to be cuts after successive events, I'm assuming. That's, they can't control that. That's a little bit stressful, because it's like, well, what if I have a bad event and then I get knocked out early? It's like, well, that's competition. But that's, I think, what was your...
So what challenges will they face,
Yes.
and what adversity?
Yes, exactly. So that would be something. It's just managing like what they can control. That's kind of always what I go back to with competitors, is like, what can you control when you compete, which is obviously your game plan, the things you're telling yourself, the things you're focusing on. And at the end of the day, if you did as well as possible in things you can control, then you can walk away with your head held high with your result and outcome. And so I try to have that dialogue with athletes.
Would you ever really bring up other athletes in this conversation, or not really?
No, and that probably comes from my background, because one of the hardest things I would do as a competitor in golf is I would always look at other players, and it would never really help me. And so as I matured and developed as a golfer, one thing I got a lot better at was really focusing on like what I could control and myself, and that allowed me to really blossom and reach new levels in my performance. And so now I take that with my athletes now as as an idea for game time decision making or performance, where we're really focusing on things we can control and not really thinking about any ancillary things or people on the outside that obviously our competitors, we're going against them, but if we're a little bit too connected to that person, we're going to lose focus on what we need to do here. Because as you know, like, CrossFit is so demanding physically, you only have so much energy to give to something, and anytime you got to give that to somewhere else, you're losing out on another area. And so we need to be very conservative with how we're utilizing all that energy, whether it's physically or mentally. So.
Gotcha. Well, I'd love to keep going down that rabbit hole, but let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
We'll spend maybe a minute or two on it. But right now, what are you the most interested in terms of the fitness world to investigate or to experience?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that earlier. I might think about it. And I mean, that's so interesting. I'll just say this, because of what I'm doing right now, is just seeing with my games athletes, like seeing what a human body can do and still improve and get better is extremely fascinating, because it just shows you how resilient a human can be despite all the stress that's being imposed on it. So it's stretching my brain on like what people can do, and then what people need to be able to do to be at that level, because that's what it's helping also create is context for me on, if you want to go to the games, well, I know like how much work you should be able to do and what amount of reps you need to be accumulating on a weekly basis, or what simulations you should be able to go through and recover and move forward with. So it's just creating better context around what the elite at this sport requires, and then I look at where people currently sit, and then I help them again create that truth that, okay, you're here, you're 5, and we want to go to 10, and that's going to probably take 4 years of real solid consistency. So that's probably something I'm becoming a little bit more in tune with and looking more at, because I'm going through it right now. It's just seeing what the capabilities are with exercise and how much a human can actually do.
If there's something that CrossFit has done, it's to turn that formula on its head for fitness-related progress in multiple energy systems.
Yeah,
you know
seriously.
Yeah, now, the real fascinating thing will be how beneficial is that in the long term.
Well, that's another conversation.
Right. We can't go down that rabbit hole today.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
that's something that is going to be so interesting. Is let's define short-term versus long-term resiliency
Exactly.
or health or
Yeah.
something like that. That's
Exactly.
that's a deep one. But Sam, I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Jim.
We'll pick this back up soon.
Got
But, we'll see you guys next time.